Hello everybody and welcome back to the test screening. This is the film and TV podcast where we review a great variety of different things, as is definitely demonstrated in this episode, and then we give them a ranking to see if they passed the test. So I'm here today, as always, with the wonderful Billy Parker. How are you doing, Billy?
I'm doing very good. It's been a little while since we've
It
done some reviews, and there's been some very interesting things happening recently in the world of cinema, as demonstrated by our lineup today.
Yeah, very interesting things. Good things? I don't know if I could call it good, but interesting, definitely. We had the Oscars. We did have the Oscars a little while ago. You were commenting on them live on our Instagram. What's just to round off the experience? What was your general feeling about the Oscars this year?
I mean, in terms of the actual ceremony, I quite enjoyed it. I mean, sometimes it's no secret that some of the broadcasts in the past have been an absolute slog to get through. But the Jimmy Kimmel was decent, as he usually is. He's reliably kind of solid as a host. And I thought most of the funny bits, particularly the John Cena sketch, went off very well.
Good.
I mean, in terms of the actual awards, I think we're both in agreement that it went, and as most people are, that it went pretty much exactly the way everyone expected it to. Oppenheimer sweeps a lot of the big stuff, which, I don't really agree with at all, but, we all knew that was coming very far in advance, so it's hard to be too surprised about that. But I did like the fact that a lot of them were kind of spread out. Anatomy of a Fall got a screenplay one, even though it wouldn't have been my pick. American Fiction got a screenplay Oscar. Zone of Interest, Sound and Foreign Film. The Holdovers getting supporting actress. It was nice to see a general kind of like almost even split between quite a lot of the films, as there was a lot of really good quality nominees on display this year.
Yeah, I agree. I quite enjoyed watching it. I kind of dipped in and out, as you do. I'm not quite as dedicated as you, and I think as soon as I saw that Oppenheimer was clearing the floor, I kind of lost interest a little bit. I was like, okay, I see where this is going. And but you know what? My favourite bit, Ryan Gosling performing I'm Just Ken. He owned it.
Incredible.
So good.
The fact that,
they definitely put a few memorable moments in there.
Yeah, the fact that they got the actual Slash on stage to play the guitar solo to I'm Just Ken.
Oh, that was perfect. The way they just pulled back with the camera and he was there, I screamed.
I screamed as well. Me and my mum both screamed. We're like, oh my God.
Yes. So, I mean, ultimately, a pretty bland Oscars. I thought some good moments, but, it's one of those tune into the highlights, wouldn't stay for the full show. That was my main impression of it.
Nothing that outrageous, nothing that kind of shattering. I liked the kind of the change with the format where they had each kind of 5 past nominees come out to present the acting awards and each kind of give the actors their own sort of little description of moment. I thought that was a nice change up. Were you not a fan?
I find it really cringy when Hollywood does this whole patting each other on the back situation. I mean, I know that's essentially what the Oscars is. It's literally Hollywood patting each other on the back. But I don't know. I think there was just a bit of it where I was like, the secondhand embarrassment is getting to me from all of this. And also it made this whole thing longer, which, it's long as it is. We don't need it longer. But nice sentiment, a bit cringy for me. But, take what you want. I'm gonna spoil a bit of one of our reviews to talk about our main topic, because basically about a week ago I put on our group chat, Billy, we need to watch Irish Wish. I can't even say it properly. Irish Wish, which is a Netflix original film by Lindsay Lohan about Ireland? Question mark?
Is it though?
Heavy question mark.
Is it?
Is it? I mean, unlikely. Yeah, it's not really about Ireland at all. So, well, in preparation for us to relive in review form Irish Wish, Billy, please talk us through some actually good, actually Irish cinema, so that we can, go into Irish Wish with our conscience clear.
Sure. I mean, it just before I get onto that, the great thing about our friendship and our working relationship here on the test screening is that in amongst all my big, sometimes pretentious art house cinema viewings that I do every week and big Hollywood blockbusters, I can always count on you to bring me back down to earth with an absolute streaming clunker that grounds me and makes me realise, oh yes, it's not all fine art. So thank you for that.
You know what? You're welcome. Happy to be of service.
So, and also part of what got me thinking about great Irish films was we had St. Patrick's Day recently. I wonder how much that played into the decision to watch Irish Wish. I wonder if the timing of the release was also
I was going to say
there.
It didn't impact my watching, but it 100% was the reason why they released it around this time.
Definitely. So, when people say to me, great Irish films, there are several that come to mind, but one absolutely comes to mind to me before any other one, and that is Jim Sheridan's In the Name of the Father, which is, I believe, 1993, Daniel Day-Lewis in one of his greatest on-screen performances. He was nominated for a Best Actor Oscar for it. It's a biographical crime drama from Jim Sheridan. It's based on the true story of the Guildford Four, who were 4 people falsely convicted of the 1974 Guildford pub bombings that killed 4 off-duty British soldiers and 1 civilian. And it was, occurred in the height of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and there was, a lengthy legal battle to attempt to exonerate these people, and also just a lengthy prison sentence for the wrongly accused as well. And Daniel Day-Lewis's performance is nothing short of incredible. It's volatile, it's vibrant, it's feisty, it's just muscular as well. He's just a total free spirit and just dogged in his determination to fight for his and his family's innocence. And Jim Sheridan's direction is just fantastic. There's an opening sort of riot sequence in the middle of Belfast that is just so invigorating and arresting, just with Molotov cocktails being thrown off the top of buildings and tanks crashing through the screen, crashing through the walls of this housing estate, while Voodoo Child by Jimi Hendrix just blasts off a nearby loudspeaker that one of the Irish guys is holding up in the estate. And it's really arresting and commanding, and is also just is expertly crafted in how it sort of smoothens out as we get into sort of the prison section of the story as well. And it's galvanizing and really inspiring, just this story of injustice and how really determined people fought against that. And for me, that is the best Irish film I've ever watched, and I would highly recommend it to any one wanting to venture into that sector of cinema. I mean, Jim Sheridan's filmography in general has some real classics in it. You've also got In America, which is about some Paddy Considine and Samantha Morton, from what I remember, and also Jimon Honsu in a supporting role, Irish immigrants that emigrate to New York and sort of try and find their way in this sort of rundown tenement building there. Very beautiful, and also just great account of people displaced and trying to find, a new future and build a new life for themselves in a country that doesn't, immediately accept them. We've reviewed The Quiet Girl here on the podcast, recent film that was actually in the Irish language, and I believe was also nominated for an Academy Award. Yes, Academy Award for Best International Feature Film, which was great to see Ireland having a nomination in that category. There's a really underrated drama called Calvary, featuring Brendan Gleeson as a sort of weary priest, and that has some really interesting messaging around the idea of forgiveness and guilt and justice, which I really enjoy. Ken Loach won his first Palme d'Or, actually, first of his 2 Palme d'Ors, in 2006 for a film called The Wind That Shakes the Barley, which stars Cillian Murphy and is around it's sort of fictionalised historical drama, because the 2 brothers at the centre of it are fictionalised, but it's based around the Irish War for Independence and also the Irish Civil War, which kind of were occurring during the late 1910s going into the early 1920s. And Ken Loach and Paul Laverty bring the usual style of and Barry Ackroyd, the cinematographer, bring their usual excellence and pristine observational filmmaking to that very volatile period of history and capture the grit, but also the social and familial complexities that were occurring on both sides of that conflict. So there's really plenty of great Irish cinema for people to dig their teeth into.
Yeah, definitely. Would Banshees of Inisherin also count?
Oh yes, it certainly would. I mean, two Irish leads set in...
Yeah, I loved that. I loved that film.
It's a terrific film. I read a really interesting article about the Banshees of Inisherin and how essentially I think there's lots of ways you can read that central friendship between Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, but I read a really interesting article that made me see the film in a whole new light, and basically was talking about how you can interpret their friendship and their sort of rift that occurs between the 2 of them as a metaphor for Ireland's relationship with itself, because sort of in the background, in the periphery of because it's set on a very remote island, so it's fictional Isle of Inisherin, but it's sort of off mainland Ireland. But so in the background, we hear about the fact that there's a lot of death occurring, as the film is set near the end of the Irish Civil War. Interestingly enough, connection there with Wind That Shakes the Barley, and it can be interpreted that their relationship and the way it breaks down is about Ireland's relationship with itself, and how there's been rifts between Irish people during the Troubles throughout history. And yeah, it's already a very layered and blackly comedy drama film, but that kind of just added a whole new dimension to it that I really loved.
So talking of Irish films, oh god, that hurt to say. We're going to start off by talking about Irish Wish. So it's not an Irish film. It's nowhere near an Irish film. I rescind my claims. This is the new Lindsay Lohan rom-com, the Lohan-essence, if you will, from Netflix, released around St. David's Day. And I need someone to examine my brain, because I enjoyed it, but none of it was good. I don't understand why I had such a good time.
Oh, I had a fabulous time watching it, but it was a complete train wreck. But
it's awful.
Fabulously entertaining. I mean, there's just...
I was just thinking, she did another one of these around Christmas, right? And I can see why this kind of genre is attractive to Lindsay Lohan at this point in her career. Obviously, she kind of had a bit of a downward spiral after, her teenage years. To be honest, with the kind of stuff that she was subjected to, anyone would have a little bit of difficulty. And now I see these as kind of a bit of a stepping stone back into the limelight. So she did one at Christmas with one of the guys from Glee. And that had a similar vibe, as in it was the most hallmarky bit of sludge you'd ever see, but it was so entertaining. Like, she falls down a cliff while skiing and has amnesia and forgets that she's married to this guy, and then of course she wakes up to this cabin man from the woods.
Because it has to be a grizzled cabin man. That is just... Of
course. Well, he's not really grizzled. He's not grizzled at all. He's the blonde dude from Glee who's just slightly beefy, and then they have a relationship. It's really weird.
Of course they do.
It's quite funny. Of course they do. And the husband turns out to be gay. Spoiler. But anyway, very entertaining. Kind of knew what it was from the beginning, and also like they 100% what they like knew what they were doing. Putting Lindsay Lohan in that role because she's still a big name and she still has comedy chops. And if anything, I think what Irish Wish proves is that Lindsay Lohan is too good for this shit.
She really is.
She really is. You know what? She still has a presence. She still has her comedic timing, her like leading woman energy. Say what you want about these kinds of films, but I think the sole reason why I enjoyed this as much as I did was because of her. I think if it had been anybody else, like literally anybody, I don't care how funny or how good they were, I think anybody else would not have been able to get this kind of reaction out of me. It had to be Lindsay Lohan.
I think
that being said,
I just think she has.
Sorry, go on.
I just think she has this luminous quality about her that kind of commands the screen a little bit. Like she smiles and it literally lights up the entire screen. It's really hard not to like her and not to get behind her, even if the the things surrounding her is a complete quagmire of cliche and triteness. She's just a really likable on-screen presence, and I think that does a lot of the heavy lifting here because, my God, what is this script?
Oof. So, to run you through the story, Lindsay Lohan plays a book editor for this Irish douchebag who writes these fantasy novels, and she essentially writes them for him. She's his editor, but she essentially does a lot of the heavy lifting, a lot of the work, like Lindsay Lohan does in this movie, for his books. And she's got a massive crush on him. She wants to marry him. And then, out of nowhere, a magical eyelash situation means that he ends up falling in love with one of her friends instead. We do a little fast forward, and we find out that they're getting married instead. Tragedy. I'm crying. Everyone's upset. Not really. And basically, we learn that the Irish author lives in a Windows display screen, which apparently is Ireland, but it looks like New Zealand, and I can't. Anyway, so she finds a stone throne in the middle of Ireland. Bear with me, where she is approached by Saint Bridget, the ghost of, or the sprite of Saint Bridget.
I have no idea.
Yeah, well, I did not know going into it that this was the kind of film it was. But anyway, Saint Bridget grants her, like a genie, a wish, and she wishes to be married to the douchebag author. But when her wish is granted, all of a sudden she discovers that she has zero chemistry with this man whatsoever. She actually has more chemistry with the photographer who she originally didn't get on with at the airport. Because...
Who's English?
Rom-com.
In the film called Irish Wish.
Yes! Thank you. There's not much Irishness going on here. I'd also like to question the validity of the author's Irish accent, because it was a bit rough. It wasn't great.
A bit rough?
Just a bit. I think he sounded like someone doing an impression of an Irish accent.
Oh, do you know, I think the thing that's, to me, most insulting about Irish Wish, aside from what has been handed to Lindsay Lohan here, is the fact that it basically just uses Ireland as a calling card for prettiness. It's like, where can we find that looks very nice and whimsical to distract from the and put Lindsay Lohan in it, to distract from the fact that the film is completely narratively bankrupt in character bankrupt in every other possible conceivable way. And also, everyone basically knows where this is going from the very start. And we can't write one good line of dialogue in the entire film. So we just need to put a lot of pretty hills and nice little rustic pubs and some charming Irish people, and there we have film.
I do like the fact that they got Lindsay Lohan to drink a Guinness, though. I mean, top marks for that.
I wonder how much persuasion that took.
I don't know.
Oh.
And also, there's so many cringy little moments in it, but they were so cringy they kind of made me laugh. Like the bit where the English guy tries to teach her how to do darts, and I think I rolled my eyes so hard they went back into my head. And honestly, this kind of film, there are so many people that love this kind of thing, and fair play to you. If this is the kind of film that you enjoy or you put it on while you're cooking, I'm not going to take that away from you. But this was a drinking game film for me. I can't just casually watch it. I was struggling. I'm like, I need alcohol. And some people to tear into this with.
I mean, the opening credits were enough to make me gag. I mean, just the really twinkly travelogue-esque graphics that look like they were made in After Effects by a 13-year-old that just sort of slap across the screen with just reckless abandon. It just enough to make me retch. And then you have absolute poetry in lines like, "Can I provide any emergency eyelash assistance?" Because we all say things like that. It's like I realised this partway through about the dialogue. It's like the entire dialogue strategy of the film was just to write everyone speaking in the language of flirt, because it sounds like everyone is flirting with everyone in this film. It's even when they're not intending to. It's like, everyone is just like one hair away from a cheeky eyebrow raise. It's so weird. I can't get over it.
I do enjoy how bad the dialogue is. Mainly just because you know what it sounds like? It sounds like the vomit draft of a script. When you put anything in place of dialogue that you haven't figured out yet, you just see you need the characters to go over there, so you make one of the characters say, "Let's go over there."
Yeah, placeholder lines. And there's so many bits
placeholder lines
where somebody asks Lindsay Lohan a question that is basically designed to elicit exposition. It's like, "What do you feel about this? What did you do that? You edit his book, but you edit his books, but you really write them, don't you?" Just stuff like that all the way through.
Yeah.
It's just it's such lazy is an understatement for the writing in this.
I mean, can we also just appreciate how little chemistry Lindsay Lohan has with either of the dudes? And listen, I'm a Lindsay Lohan stan. She can have chemistry with people in a romantic comedy. We've seen it before. So the fact that neither of these, I mean, I've not seen either of the guys in anything else, but I hated both of them from the get-go, and at no point were they redeemed. At no point was I like, you know what? She's right for you. You know what I mean? I wasn't rooting for them at all.
No, not at all.
I was rooting for her and St. Bridget to get it on in the end. I was so bored of all of the absolute shenaniganery. I did quite like... The only bit of it from the screenplay that I did kind of enjoy was when when the wish first happens and she comes to the realization that she doesn't have any chemistry with this man that she's been basically crushing on for years, and that her friend does, and that some people are just better for each other. It's kind of like that little wake-up moment. I did quite enjoy that. But the fact that she just goes along with it for a while annoyed me, because then it's kind of like taking the agency away from her. I kind of wanted her to be dumped in this nightmare. I wanted her to see him being absolutely gross and to be like, nah, this ain't it. I really wanted her to see that he's actually a really bad husband, and it didn't quite go far enough. It felt like it was going there, and then it didn't, because it didn't want to make him look like anything other than pretty, because they had, a couple of 10 more minutes more of film to juice out of it. But I really wanted to just go a little bit harder on that aspect of it, because then I would have thought it'd be quite funny.
Yeah, and it doesn't even do that. It just takes her. It's like she's completely oblivious and she's trying to make it work in spite of the fact that there's zero chemistry. I'm just like, no. How you were literally told at the start with the most predictable winking at the audience line, is this really what you wish for from Saint Bridget? And it's like, okay, he's a shit husband, wake up.
So yeah, aren't you glad that I wasted an hour and a half of your life?
Utterly thrilled.
It's
an F.
What?
Do we even need to say it's an F?
It's an F. It's an F. But weirdly, watch it. It's bad.
It's a cheerful F.
It's.
I can't say.
I was going to say it's a fairly inoffensive F, but if you're Irish, I kind of feel like it is a little bit offensive.
If we're talking about the film's use of Ireland, it is definitely an offensive F.
It's definitely offensive. It is the screensaver of Irish. Irish is in bunny ears, by the way. Films, truly. You know what would have made this so much better?
What?
If the entire cast of Derry Girls
just showed up halfway through.
Showed up. As a cameo, even just as a cameo, that would have elevated that to an A for me, because
incredible.
Just imagine having a really fairy tale-y, fakey, twee Irish film, and all of a sudden you have the Derry Girls come in, cussing it up in the background, just tearing down the Englishman. Can you imagine?
All
of them taking apart the English guy.
All are just rollerblades through, very whimsical, into the wedding, into the reception. Erin looks completely confused. Claire is screaming and is just incredibly anxious, and Michelle's just like, "What the fuck's going on?"
Michelle's just looking the English guy up and down and being like,
"You're not it."
You're not it. Not today. You know what? That's it. Rewrite this film now to include the Derry Girls. Because I find the Irish accent and Irish comedy so funny, and this had none of it in. Maybe because none of it's actually Irish. If they'd had some I don't know, she goes to Ireland thinking it's going to be one thing and then is kind of met with more of a reality, that also could have been funny. I would have been down for that, even with the whole St. Bridget thing. If there had been...
I think we'd be asking a bit too much from the script at that point for it to be intelligent and observational.
Exactly. I would have been down for that. Anyway, we've spent way too long talking about Irish Wish. So we're going to move on. Yeah, way more than it deserves. We're going to move on now to Dune Part 2. Now, this has been the hotly anticipated sequel to Dune, which I did go and see in the cinema. I had mixed feelings about the first part.
Me too.
I thought there were bits of it that were very good, and I also thought it was overlong and weirdly shot in some places. I thought the pacing was very odd in the first installment, but I did feel like it had potential. So I'm really interested to see what you thought about Part 2, especially considering that when they made Dune Part 1, they didn't know that they were getting a Part 2, did they? It was a bit of a risk.
I think that was how it was reported at the time. I've seen some interviews with Denis Villeneuve that have since sort of debunked that claim a little bit.
Right.
But yeah, I think there was sort of a question mark as to how well this was actually going to do. Part 1 was actually going to do at the box office. And when it did... in fact, very well, and was critically and fan praised very much by long-time fans of the novel. It seemed more clear cut. That a sequel was going to be greenlit, or rather a part 2. The second part to this kind of holistic story. And I think, like you, I wasn't particularly inspired by part 1, as were certain friends of ours who I saw it with. And I did rewatch kind of almost reluctantly because I wasn't particularly inspired by part one. I did rewatch part two before part one before seeing part two, so that I was as refreshed on the lore as I could have been. Because I knew that part two was going to be, a monumental feat of like lore condensing from the novel and just like have a lot of concurrent running plot threads. So I needed to be sort of on my A game in terms of knowing what was going on. And I'm glad I did, because it reminded me of, I'd forgotten quite a bit of the lore from part one, so it was certainly essential to rewatch it. But one of my initial problems with the film adaptation of Dune, the part one, was its kind of lack of substantial development in the characters, and feeling as though everyone kind of served more of a role as a chess piece rather than having a distinct personality. But actually, I did find, and I've seen some reviews on Letterboxd that kind of echo this sentiment, I found on a rewatch of part one that with a greater handle now on the baseline story, my interest in the political intrigue and kind of tapestry of like the galactic sort of interplay between the families, in lieu of actual like vibrant character personality, it deepened a lot. The themes of political manipulation and imperialism were that much clearer to me, and also it felt a lot more obvious to me what part one was setting up and what was kind of laying the groundwork for to come in part two. So, and I felt that way about the pacing too. The first time I saw part one, I actually have to say I thought the pacing moved a lot nicer when I kind of saw it on a rewatch, and it didn't feel as length to me, if I'm completely honest. So I was quite pleasantly surprised by how much I warmed to part one on a rewatch, and I went into part two, I have to say, very excited. And I think what Denis Villeneuve has managed to do with part two is a real feat of adaptation, because this is obviously not, I've not read the novel, but it's by all accounts not an easy novel to adapt, because the story is so vast and is dealing with some very kind of lofty philosophical and ethical themes, and just a huge cast of characters as well. Now, in terms of what he's managed to do visually, it has a visual majesty and scope of design that is so vastly impressive. I struggle to recall a studio blockbuster or an epic drama in any genre, not just science fiction, looking this amazing and having a world that feels so thoroughly lived in. He utilises a vital combination, I think, to the story, a combination of location shoots in huge deserts and sand dunes in countries like Georgia, and then set builds that are so beautifully designed in their smaller details, the grooves and quirks in metal, the cave paintings and drawings, the hieroglyphics, the rough texture of a lot and sort of half destroyed nature of a lot of the cave systems that the various factions and tribes use, and the unique characteristics of the different factions, costumes in both rustic and high tech. It all contributes to this feeling like the most well realized and believable sci-fi world I think I've ever seen on screen. And whilst it does have some pivotal climactic action sequences that are so bold and so grand and epic that they give like the biggest moments in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, a run for their money, I don't think that for me is ever really the key draw of part two. That's not a criticism of the action. It's really incredible to behold and kind of caps off the power struggles in the plot that have been simmering up until that point really satisfyingly. But the fact that the human and political story being the prevailing, intriguing sector of the narrative is a real accomplishment for me. The cautionary themes of delusion, religious fanaticism, imperialism, colonialism are fully developed here, and all of sort of the promise that was set out for the story in part one is fully, for me, capitalised on in part two. And I think it's balanced masterfully over a very lengthy 2 hour and 40-minute runtime. As I said before, there are many concurrent plot threads running alongside each other about, conveying how the various families' actions and scheming are tangibly and compellingly impacting the overall picture. It feels like every decision and every bit of scheming and every backstab and, chess piece move has a real important overall impact on the film's story. Nothing feels out of place. Every piece of lore and world building feels significant and is condensed, I think, by Villeneuve's and his co-writer's script that is digestible within the confines of the runtime, but I don't think feel like an oversimplification of the ideas that have been laid out here, and that isn't a sentiment that has been echoed by fans of the novel that I've sort of read their thoughts from online. The only time I think the film slips on this slightly is there is without broad spoilers, a well-known key internal battle in one of the central characters, and whether or not he succumbs to delusions of grandeur and being, deified as a messianic-like figure, like, this Jesus-like character. And sort of this hinges on a very pivotal decision on territorial strategy in the larger conflict, and it's kind of held off on for a long time by the character, but the eventual sort of pivot that comes with that, it feels as though it only really occurs from mild to moderate persuasion from peripheral characters. I feel like it's a moment that needs to happen in the narrative and is very important. It doesn't feel like that decision shouldn't happen, but I feel like there needed to be more of a defined plot impetus for that decision to happen, to just make it all feel like it hangs together. But that's a pretty minor gripe. I think the screenplay manages to beautifully distill this central struggle between embracing a potentially misguided position as a leader for the disenfranchised and embracing that culture on a more personal and thoughtful and community-minded level. I feel like that's encapsulated with the relationship between Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya, their characters Paul Atreides and Chani from the Fremen. I felt a real warmth and chemistry between them, and it gives the underlying thematic conflict in the larger political situation real personal stakes for me. And that it made the overall battle on which is huge on a macro level between the various families in space. It gave it real emotional drive and real centering for me, that central pairing between the two of them. And I think all of this and the closeness of the relationship, it's not just between Paul and Chani, but also Paul and his mother and the various other characters from the families. Denis Villeneuve kind of supports and enhances that visually through very intimate and gentle handheld camera work that, again, centres the political and epic back to the interpersonal. And I think, it's bold, it's large, but it's such, a confident piece of storytelling, both visually and written. And aside from, I don't really have any major gripes with that outside of that, maybe that one decision being slightly rushed, and also maybe some of the final sort of conflict at the end. Maybe that could have been stretched out a little bit more, given a bit more breathing room. But by and large, I was hugely impressed with Dune Part 2, and I had an absolute blast with it. And I feel like it's one of the greatest sort of recent accomplishments I've seen of marrying very lofty and heady political and social commentary and storytelling with big blockbuster scope and action. I would give this my highest rating. I would give it an A+.
Definitely need to go and see it then. Need to catch up. I need to do a rewatch of the first one as well. I think my issues with the first one were mainly, again, character based. I couldn't really connect to anybody, and I found that made it quite a slog because I didn't really care, because I thought they were just all horrible people. Not that I don't necessarily need a character to be likable to want to follow them, like even with things like Game of Thrones and things like that. I don't need a likable protagonist, but I think I have to connect with them on some way. I have to see where they're coming from, and I think in the first one I just didn't latch on to anybody in that way. But maybe on a rewatch, maybe that's the trick. Maybe it just needs another go around with some fresh eyes after a while and see if I can get into it.
I felt exactly the same watching part one. I was kind of just like, well, there's not really anyone like to centre in on and grab onto here. But actually, on a rewatch, I think I saw the through line of kind of establishing this sort of this prophetic idea that this Messiah-like figure may have come forth in Paul, and I kind of saw the film's effort to set that up and create that sort of intriguing idea and mystery a lot more in part one when I saw it on a rewatch. So that was kind of one of the key things that made it click to me.
I do love the fact that his name is Paul. Everybody else has weird sci-fi names, and Timothée Chalamet is just Paul. What?
Is absolutely hilarious. Like Lisan Al Gaib, Arrakis, Paul.
I love it. It is one of my favourite things about the entire franchise. Do you think that there's going to be Children of Dune, all of that? I mean, obviously the Dune series is vast. Like, there's more than just a couple of books in it.
I think my understanding is that there's Dune and there's Dune Messiah, which is the sequel that sort of completely wraps up the Paul Atreides sort of arc of the story. And then every sort of book after that is sort of an offshoot and spin-off of the Paul Atreides sort of baseline arc. So I think Denis Villeneuve said that he wants it to be right, so he's going to take his time with the writing and deciding if he wants to do it. I feel like you could potentially just leave it at the end of part 2 and you wouldn't... I mean, there is an openness to it, but I feel like it wraps up enough that I wouldn't be upset if there isn't a third. But I feel like it will probably get Messiah and sort of wrap up the Paul arc, and then that will be it.
I'd also like to give a shout out to Austin Butler's baldness in this film. Truly,
really
I've never
is.
seen a more bald,
He's
bald man in my life. He's polished.
So
I've
shiny.
not seen the film, but I've seen that man's bald head, and it's now seared into my mind. So
it's even bolder than you think it is from the trailers. It's glory.
It is such a bald head. Okay, and on that note, moving on to our final review of this episode, Madame Web. This is
Madame
another
Web.
Sony. This is a Sony Spider-Man film, right? This isn't part of the MCU. This is one of their attempts to keep hold of the Spider-Man name by any means necessary, I assume.
I think so. I mean, but it is sort of Spider-Man adjacent as well. I mean, it is in association with Marvel Entertainment. It's produced by Columbia. It's Columbia Pictures. So
yeah, I thought it was.
Distributed by Sony Pictures Releasing. So there's a few sort of people that have got handles in this one. But I mean, perhaps that contributed to it not being all that good. I mean, the run-up to the release of Madame Web was one of the most interesting in recent memory, because I mean, it's been an absolute doozy of like laughably bad PR and marketing. I mean, we've all seen the trailer that has he was researching spiders in the Amazon with my mother right before she died. We've all seen that that line of exposition, which isn't even in the final film. Sadly,
I loved that trailer. It was so like, what?
I know. I heard that line and I was like, who wrote that? Who sounded that out and thought that's a good idea, we're going to put that in. It's like exposition that is so clunky you'd have like a smoother job trying to squeeze a double-decker bus into a Petri dish. It's like actually wild that somebody thought to put that line in. I guess somebody must have thought better of it because it's not in the final film. Although I was kind of hoping that everyone was going to go, way, when it turned up in the final film. So that was slightly disappointing. But that wasn't it. You then have the unhinged fireworks that was Dakota Johnson's press tour. Oh my lordy! I don't think I've ever seen a more entertaining press tour for a film like ever. It's because she clearly didn't have a good time on this, and it is so glaringly obvious if you watch her interview, because she so brazenly and openly talks about how disorganized the production was and her disdain for the project, that any PR team would have been quaking in their boots if an actor promoted their big film like this, which in this case probably actually has some real life accuracy, because do you know what she did to her representation after this?
Oh no.
She fired them all.
Oh.
She fired her entire management team, I think, after completing the film. So you have all of that, which is just popcorn front seat 3D glasses level entertainment. I was like, I'm just watching the chaos unfold. I'm living for it. But it naturally begs the question of if the film's final quality reflects the calamity that was the promotional run-up to its release. I went in thinking, can it really be that bad? Well, the best way I can describe my feelings on it is that this is the purest cinematic distillation I've ever watched of the phrase, I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed. And also slightly baffled. Because, I mean, before we even get onto the script and actually what Dakota Johnson's like in it, the biggest head scratch for me about Madam Web is that for how expensive it was to make and how large scale the productions are on superhero and Marvel films, I can't quite wrap my head around just how this ended up as shoddily made as it is. I had this cyclical experience of watching it where every 20 minutes or so there was yet another unforgiving technical blemish, and I just thought to myself, this cost $80 million to make. How has it been released in this state? So, like, the lighting is so blindingly harsh and searing, it makes J.J. Abrams' use of lens flare in Star Trek seem like decidedly well-poised and restrained. I'd probably have less risk of damage to my sight if I was staring directly into the sun. There are these time travel vision sequences that have the camera swinging and careening around with such reckless abandon that I honestly questioned at points if the camera operator was a trapeze artist trying to work after downing 4 bottles of Chardonnay. It's that shaky and just flips upside down and side to side to the point where during action sequences you can't tell what the hell is going on or where anything is. And it actually, like, I've seen Cloverfield and the Blair Witch Project and lots of found footage films that didn't make me nauseous with their camera work, with their uber shaky mockumentary camera work, which they, of course, is justifiable in that case. This started to give me motion sickness. I'm not even exaggerating. There's like, the opening scene features like Succession-style docudrama rickety handheld camera work. It has it in that one scene, and then with the crash zooms, and then it never returns to it again. And when the camera isn't... And like when the camera isn't swinging around in the action sequences like it's an extra in Tarzan, it's so static and bland against a grade that might be the single greyest thing I've ever seen in my life. Did someone just like select the grey section of the colour wheel and then whack the contrast up as high as it would possibly go?
They should have just left it in log.
They really should have. I honestly think it would have looked better. There are sound mixing issues everywhere. There's dialogue that pans weirdly mid-conversation that makes it sound like the characters are rollerblading across the room. It's like, you're standing right there, and yet it sounds like you're getting further and further away from me. And like, getting even quieter, like, just like fading into the distance. They're like, everyone seems unbalanced, and like they're mixed at different levels. There's an action scene in a diner where you have like diegetic jukebox sound of Toxic by Britney Spears, which I love.
As you
Great
do.
song, tune. Bit of a weird choice for that sequence, but whatever. I'm always happy to hear it in a film. But it's fighting to be heard over the dialogue, the fighting sound effects, the explosion, and the score. Who thought it was a good idea to put the score and Britney Spears over each other at the same time? And it's like, it just fuses into this
weird,
horrifying auditory quagmire. And that's even before I tell you about the editing. The editing is an utter catastrophe. There are match cuts that don't match because there are stutters in the camera movement between cuts that mean there is like a jolt and then the match cut just doesn't match, moving into the next scene. It's like you can see where the match was supposed to happen, but there's a pause, which means it doesn't happen. There are cuts that cut off lines of dialogue and take words out. I'm not joking, that does actually happen.
Oh my God.
There are fight scenes and car chases that are so choppy, it actually started to, again, make me dizzy. And there are flashbacks that are just incomprehensible. And so the villain is played by Tahar Rahim, who is woefully miscast. And I like Tahar Rahim. But I can't entirely blame him for the performance as the villain being so terrible because, and this is perhaps the most baffling technical issue to me, is his ADR. Have you seen any clips of him in the film?
No.
So I honestly think the poor man deserves a formal apology from how the studio has butchered him in this, because there are literal shots where you can hear him speaking, but his mouth is clearly not moving a millimetre. It's like the ADR has
It could be another one of his powers.
Oh yeah, I can speak telepathically.
I can talk without opening my mouth.
I'm a real life ventriloquist dummy. But I was looking at it going, no, he really isn't actually speaking, and yet there is ADR going on in the background, and it happens multiple times, like entire halves of scenes. He's not talking visually, but you can hear him talking as though he's supposed to be. Not since Cats have I seen a big budget studio feature that is so deeply submerged in technical issues to the point that it should not have been released in the state that it's in. It boggles my mind. And then this is obviously all made worse by the fact that you have a lead that looks less like she wants to be in the film than Hugh Grant did as the Oompa Loompa in Wonka, and that takes some doing, as we both know. And to be honest, I don't even think you can criticise her that much, because it is glaringly obvious that she's not even trying.
Have you seen her Architect Digest interview?
No.
I think from a while ago, where her house had very clearly been like set up by a production designer, and there was just a random bowl of limes in the kitchen, and instead of talking about the kitchen, she just walks over and really deadpan starts talking about how much she likes limes.
I think she has sort of a... It's fun. I think she does have like a very deadpan sense of humour about these sorts of things.
I did kind of, I respected her for that, because she drew attention to the illusion and how ridiculous some of these things are set up, that they just put a bowl of limes.
I love it. She's just so done with the BS. I love it. I think more
honestly, I'll send you a clip later, because it's truly wonderful.
Please do.
But anyway, so she didn't really want to be here.
I think Dakota Johnson could have been locked in a vicious legal battle or divorce proceedings, and she would have had more fun than she did on this film. She just looks absolutely comatose. But she does have like the thankless task of trying to get us on side with a protagonist who is frankly not even an anti-hero. She's just an unrepentant, mean-spirited dumpster fire of a human being. Like, part of the story revolves around her getting, part of her character's superpower is that she can see briefly into the future, so she's trying to prevent bad things from happening. And part of this then leads to her being saddled with these three girls who she's trying to save and look after over the course of the film. And she so regularly states that she does not want anything to do with them, and she feels just that like she has some sort of weird responsibility. I'm just like, rule number one, guys, if you're trying to write a sympathetic character, maybe don't have them constantly say that they just want to like abandon three teenagers that she's supposed to be looking after. Really weird that. It kind of just doesn't really make me like her very much. And it just she so regularly states her desire to not help anyone else in the film that it makes her borderline impossible to like. And she's so passive aggressive and just blunt, and just the way the character is written is just so repellent. And it makes her final shift into hero mode at the tail end feel completely unearned, to say the very least. And finally, there is the absolute abomination that is the script. I've already mentioned how distastefully the protagonist is written. Then you have an abundance of lines that feel purpose-built to make you howl. There's a scene where she puts out some milk for a cat that isn't even hers. It just loiters around her apartment. And I feel like the cat was just purely invented just so this line could occur. Because the cat comes in, starts drinking milk in the flat, and she takes this puts her, her fist under her, her chin, sort of rests her chin on her hand, looks longingly at the cat after a long pause and just says, "Us strays need to stick together." And I was just like, this is not actually happening. And I'm
to be fair, giving milk to a stray cat is probably the most relatable thing that her character sounds like she does.
It must be. It was the only sort of mildly sympathetic thing I think I saw her character do the entire film. And if the dialogue in M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin was ear scraping and Cocaine Bear was a root canal, then the dialogue in Madam Web is like having a hip replacement, a gallbladder removal, and a colonoscopy all at the same time. And that's not
wow.
And that's before we get onto the fact that there's so much plot convenience. It actually has me questioning the intelligence of the writers, since they required and utilised this many implausible events just to get the plot from A to B. I'm like, is it really that hard? And Dakota Johnson pokes around in an Amazon rainforest in what is said to be an impossible quest to find somebody. And I shit you not, the guy just waltzes up to her after 2 minutes. It's like she barely had to cut through any vines and then he just appeared. I'm just like, wow, that's the level of writing we're at here.
Did they at least draw attention to it? Did they make a funny joke?
No, that's the thing.
Oh my god,
if the film was in any way self-aware, I could kind of maybe see some comedic merit in it, but it just doesn't. It's like, it's so staggeringly inept in every department. And there is so little overall plot progression for the first hour and a half. I checked my watch like an hour and a quarter in and went, barely anything of actual proper like overall significance of the plot has actually happened. I can't quite believe this. And also the central power and conceit just destroys most of the danger and risk in the plot, because of course she can just see what's coming. So the film shoots itself in the foot with the actual power that's at the centre of it. And then it also leads to so many plot holes and lapses in the film's own internal logic. The entire script just falls apart. Like, I thought some of this when I was watching it, but also I've just gone on the internet and I've just seen people just ripping apart the logic of the film. Like, so this person whose life you're trying to prevent, because there's a scene where somebody gets hit by, she's trying to prevent, because she's a paramedic, she's trying to prevent her colleague by driving off from the scene of an accident and getting hit by a car, and she talks to him and tries not to get him to go. But actually, if she just let him go and not delayed him for the time she was speaking to him, he would have missed the van and not been hit by the truck. So actually, there's so many like little just moments like that in the script where you actually realise under even just mild scrutiny, nothing makes logical sense, and it's just, I can't even with this anymore. Like, it's no exaggeration to say that, and Marvel and DC and superhero films have, we've not had, some have been amazing, but it's been a bumpy ride in other places, and it's no exaggeration to say that Madam Web is the worst thing Marvel or DC has ever produced in the superhero genre, and the studio should be ashamed of themselves.
It's really frustrating as well when the worst scripts or the lowest amount of effort is given to the female superhero stories. And listen, I didn't know anything about Madam Web going in. I'm not like a Madam Web stan, but it seems to me to be a little bit of an annoying trend where they're just not given good writing or interesting stuff to do, which is really annoying because that gives the people who like to hate on all of the female superheroes ammo to come at people. Like, Brie Larson in Captain Marvel. I actually liked Captain Marvel quite a bit, but I can appreciate that it's not, the film itself isn't on a level with the first Iron Man or the Avengers and stuff like that in terms of entertainment rewatching value. And the same thing seems to happen for all of the female superheroes that get their own films. It's they're fine, but it felt like they almost made them as an obligation and not out of genuine love for the character. Or, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but basically make some good female superhero films, please. Marvel, DC, pull something out of your asses that, change this. Break the train.
Why can't we
rewrite the narrative?
Why can't we have a female-driven superhero film that is as inspiring and rousing as Black Panther? We need that. We don't need characters that are teenage girls that are written as whiny and needy and inept, and a paramedic who apparently couldn't care less about saving or helping anyone.
Yeah, I mean, she's a paramedic, and she doesn't care about looking after some teenage. Yeah,
baffling script writing.
This is. Is it almost in so bad it's good territory, or is it just bad?
I think it almost gets there. I think it doesn't quite, and that just makes it all the worse.
It would have been in there if they'd included the line, "My mother was studying the Amazon rainforest."
I think it would have done. If it wasn't so dreary and bland, I think it would have done.
Oh, God. Well, thank you for that, as always. What have we got coming up?
So next week, we have the newest addition to the Ghostbusters franchise with Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. We have a new film from one of my favourite Japanese directors, Hirokazu Koreeda. We reviewed his previous film, Broker, in the early days of the podcast, actually. We also have the religious, nun-centric horror film Immaculate, starring Sydney Sweeney. And
I've heard good things.
I heard mixed things, and I'm interested to talk about it. I'd be interested to hear what you think as well. And then we also have the new Coen brother film, not Coen brothers film, because it's only made by one of them this time. Road trip crime comedy, Drive-Away Dating. Driveway Dolls. Driveway Dolls. My apologies. So yes, we have another interesting lineup for next week.
Exciting stuff. Thank you for your reviews as always, and if you would like to hear more of Billy's opinions on the new releases that are coming out, please do keep your eye on our socials, our TikTok and our Instagram. We post on there quite regularly, and we will be back with another episode next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Bye.